Hey guys, it's Courtney. I am very excited to be on the Simon Hurley creative team, and today is the day of the new release. So I'm showing you a couple of the products that I planned on using for today's card, but didn't end up using everything. So we have the Mythical Mermaid stamp set, the Sea Floor background stamp set. I'm also using the Stark White cardstock as well as some of the new inks. I'm showing you Rosy Cheeks, but I didn't end up using that. So I'm going to show you a background, even though I didn't end up using it, but I'm saving it for a future card because I love the way it turned out. These inks blend beautifully, even when you're not doing ink blending. So I have a piece of the Stark White cardstock. I stuck a little bit of Tombow Mono Multi Glue to the back of it and let that dry, and then stuck it down to my MISTI. I'm inking the bottom portion of the stamp up with traffic cone dye ink and then kind of dabbing that off where it will meet the next color, if that makes any sense. So I'm moving on to the second color now. And this is the Over the Moon. So I'm inking up the stamp, taking my stamp chamois, and I'm dabbing off the top and the bottom so that it kind of is more of a seamless blend from the first color to the second. And it will also be a seamless color when I move on to the third color, which is Overzealous. And I have that paper or that card panel directly next to me, so I can kind of guide myself as to where I need to put the ink. Obviously the ink pad is a lot larger than the area that I want to ink up, so I'm just using my stamp chamois to remove any ink that I don't need. So next we're moving on to the Clear Skies, doing the same thing, using that stamp chamois to dab off the top and the bottom so that we get a seamless blend. Go ahead and stamp that down onto the card panel there. And then we're going to move on to the final color, which is the Triple Berry, which I think is my favorite. It's really, really pretty. So I'm going to ink up the top portion of the stamp there and just use my stamp chamois to dab off the bottom portion of where I inked up, and then go ahead and stamp that down. I love this background, even though I didn't end up using it, but I will. But I just wanted to kind of show you a technique that you could do with your background stamps. So here we are going to move on to the card. And of course, I am going to be creating a 1-layer card with the Mythical Mermaids stamp set. So I'm using my MISTI here and I'm just kind of lining up my stamps. I did not cut masks for these because I know I'm going to be doing all Copic coloring. And to be honest with you, I was just being a little lazy. I really wanted to test out this Stark White cardstock. It seems very smooth. It's 110 pound. So I wanted to see if I could do some Copic coloring on it. I know inking and with the inks was great with the background stamp, so now I wanted to try some Copic coloring. Even though it doesn't say it's Copic safe or alcohol marker safe, we're going to try it anyway. So I am going to go ahead and stamp out my first mermaid here, as well as one of these little things or whatever of seaweed and the little treasure chest. And then I am going to stamp out my little boy mermaid, or merman, I think they're called, but I want to make it look as if they're holding hands. I was going to stamp some fish in the background and decided I wanted to keep this really, really simple because I'm pretty much just playing with the paper and the stamps at this point. So I'm going to go ahead and stamp these both down, and then we are going to move on to the coloring. I'm going to start off with the background, starting off with the sea floor or the sand. I take a very light color. This is actually lighter than my lightest color, and I'm kind of just mapping out where my sand will be, and then I'll end up doing my shading directly over this. So I'm going to bring out my E37 here, and I'm pretty much adding shadows to where this treasure chest is, as well as where these little pieces of seaweed are coming out of the ocean floor. And I'm kind of just creating like little V's around them. I'm going to blend that out with the E35, extending these areas out a little bit further. Same thing with the E33, just extending those areas out even further yet. And then finally, I'm going to finish off with the E31, which is actually going to be my latest color. And I'm going to fill in this entire sandy area and get these colors to blend a little bit. I did go back in with that E35 and just add a few little dots here and there just to add a little bit of texture to the sand and just kind of let them blend in, being the paper is still saturated from the other colors. So next we are going to move on to the background or the water. So I started off by, I was going to saturate my paper. to get my colors to blend a little bit easier. But then I realized, and I took a look at the card and realized how much ocean I have to fill in. So I skipped that. I'm not going to bother to do that, and I'm just going to hope that my colors blend well together. So my darkest color is going to be the E18, and I'm starting off towards the bottom of the card panel, right at the edge of that sand. And I'm kind of just flicking up my color, just being careful not to go over my images. I did have some areas where I wasn't all that careful, but I can always fix those or color directly over them, so I'm not too concerned. I am flicking up my color just to make my blending a little bit easier, but this is optional. If you haven't mastered the flick, no biggie. You can still just kind of just go up with a straight line. You'll still get good results, depending on the colors that you use. Now you'll see as I get towards the top here, when you see the colors that I'm using a natural blending family. So that means that they are all, for the most part, B18, B16, and B14 and B12, and I did mix in the B04 and B00 in there just to add more colors. But you'll notice that when I'm using the B18 and the B16, there's not really all that much of a difference between the two, because they are a natural blending family. So you're not necessarily going to get the contrast you're looking for when you're using this group, but because I'm using additional colors, I did end up getting quite a bit of, I guess, okay contrast, but it makes it easier for these larger areas. Whenever I'm filling in a huge background like this, I tend to pick colors that aren't exactly contrasting as much as I normally would as if I'm coloring an image, because it's so hard to cover up those lines where one color ends and the next color begins. So just keep that in mind when you are doing a complete background. It is okay to use colors that are very similar to one another once everything is colored, and you'll see once I get towards the top here, I do have the contrast. It's just very gradual, if that makes any sense. So here I am using the B04, and I'm sorry, I'm a little off screen there with the cap. I'm probably off screen a few times within this video. I did get a new mount for my phone, so I'm still kind of getting used to that. So I apologize if I go off screen or you miss something. So just bringing up that B04, and then I will bring in the B12. And the B04 is a little bit more bright, I guess. So you'll see that when I go in with the B12, I'm bringing that down a little bit further than I normally do. Just kind of dull that B04 to make it match the rest of the blues that I used. So I'm being careful to go around their skin, especially because I know that the colors I'm going to be using are lighter. But as far as their hair goes, I'm not too concerned about it. If I happen to go over their hair, I'm going to color over it with a darker color, so it is no big deal. So flicking up this color, and then finally I am going to finish off with the B00. And again, this is quite a bit lighter than this B12. So I am bringing it down a little bit further than I normally would, just to get the colors to blend a little bit. Once the paper dries, you'll see whether or not you have those streaky lines that you sometimes get with alcohol markers, but don't go over it too many times until the paper's dry and you actually see the true results. You'll know when your paper's dry when it's not cold to the touch. So once my background was done, we are going to move on to the coloring of the images. And I am starting off with the skin tones, and to make it nice and easy, I am using the same color combination for both of them. I am starting off with my lightest color to get the paper saturated and to map out those darkest areas. I'm just going to keep a center highlight here just to kind of make everything a little bit easy. I did notice I went over his little shoulder there with some blue, so I got rid of that with my colorless blender. The E04 will be my darkest color, and I'm just adding some shading where their hair is kind of hanging over their face, on the inside of their little arms, underneath their chins, and on either side of their little bellies, because I am using a center highlight here. Next, I'm going to bring in the E11, and I'm just going to extend these areas out a little bit further, bring down my shadows, and then I will go in with the E01, do that same thing. And in this case, I'm keeping a pretty large highlight because their faces are pretty large. So you could definitely bring in a fifth color here, or maybe even extend your shadow area. But in this case, I just kept a large highlight color. I did add a little bit of color to her cheeks with the R20, and then I'll go back in with that R50, or sorry, not the R50, the E50, which is the lightest skin tone, just to get her cheeks to blend out just a little bit. Now, I did notice that this paper is fairly smooth. For being 110-pound cardstock, it is fairly smooth. And so far, well, I can tell you now because the card's already done, I had no bleeding. So even the amount of saturation that I put on this paper, I had zero bleeding with these Copic markers. So I'm assuming it would be the same with most alcohol markers. So this is a great cardstock for alcohol marker coloring, card bases, because it's 110-pound, and it's great for inking and ink blending as well. So definitely love this cardstock. So next I'm moving on to her hair here, and I am coloring her hair red just because I feel like every mermaid should have red hair. I typically start off with my darkest color when I color hair, just because I like to maintain those flick lines, gives it just a little bit more texture. For her hair, though, it already has a lot of texture. There's a lot of lines within this image or this illustration that give her hair all that texture. So you do not have to be great at coloring. When it comes to coloring her hair, you're going to get good results every time, as long as you have a shadow and a highlight. So I am just using flicking motions with the tip of my marker, extending the flicks out each and every time. And I will leave a highlight area for the R22, which is my highlight color. Keep in mind that when you are using the flicking motions for hair and you leave that highlight, you can leave it white. It is good to make it look like they have super shiny hair, but I don't really care for the white, leaving the white, unless I'm coloring black hair. That's pretty much the only time I leave that white. So for his hair is a little bit different. His hair is kind of like pushed off to the side and kind of spiky in some areas. So I'm just going with the direction of his hair, and I am doing those same flicking motions with the E50 markers. Again, starting off with my darkest color for those darkest areas. And once I had everything colored, I realized that I kind of lost my flick lines a little bit. I lost the texture of his hair. So once your coloring is done, you can always go back in and add a little bit more shadowing if you want. In this case, I did. I just added a few little flicks with the E59 and E57, and then very, very quickly went over that with the E55 just to get it to blend a little bit. So next we are going to move on to their tails slash fins. I don't know what it is. I've been coloring so many ocean theme cards lately, I just can't help myself. So you'd think I'd know the name of them, but I'm moving on to this anyway. And I want this to kind of transition from a green to a blue green. So I'm laying out my two lightest colors first to kind of map out how far I need to go with each and every color, because I'm adding shading with the greens and shading with the blue greens. So I'm adding my YG07 as my darkest green, blending that out with the YG03, then back to that YG01, moving on to the BGs and I'm just basically, like I said, mapping out how far I need to go. And then I'm going to move in the opposite direction and add a little bit more of whatever I need to add a little bit more of. So I always lay down a base color and then move in the opposite direction, a lot like I do my ink blending, just so I can kind of map out and make sure that I have enough room for each and every color that I wanted to use. I colored his little tail slash fin the same exact way with the same color combination. For the seaweed, I'm going right in with my darkest color because these are smaller areas, using that darkest color for the base of each of these little leaves. I don't think they're leaves, but we're going to call them leaves. And also creating a shadow where one is laying behind another, and then finishing off with a YG marker just to kind of brighten everything up. For this little treasure chest here, again, going right in with my darkest color because these are fairly small areas, just adding a little bit of shading on either side and also on the inside of the, I guess it would be a lid top, I don't know, of the treasure chest. That would also create a shadow behind where the little gold coins would be. So just blending that out, using my E20s for this, just because I wanted these to be a little bit different than the sand itself, and just keeping the very top portion and the middle portion for my highlight color. For the little gold coins themselves, I'm not going to bother to do any shading. I'm just going to go in with my Y26 and fill that in solid. Same thing for these little pieces, parts of this treasure chest, going in solid. For her little bathing suit top here, I am going to bring out some purples and just add some shading on the bottom and on either side, and keeping that highlight right there in the center. So once all of my coloring was complete, I'm going to go ahead and add my sentiment, which is from the same stamp set. Going to pop that onto my acrylic block, and I'm going to kind of curve this because I want this to be curved around them, I guess. So I'm kind of just playing around with my acrylic block. Once I am happy with the position or the shape of my sentiment, I am going to be using the black hybrid ink by scrapbook.com. This gives a really, really good impression. It is great for sentiments, and I think it may be Copic safe, but you may have to heat set it first. So I went ahead and stamped my sentiment directly above my little mermaid and merman there. And I am going to add a little bit of shimmer with a Nuvo Aqua Shimmer pen to their tails / fins, as well as the little gold coins inside the treasure chest. And because I can't stop myself with the glossy accents lately, I am going to add my glossy accents pretty much all over the card, just adding bubbles in the background. So that is it. That is the card for today. I'm going to go ahead and link all the products below. Be sure to check out the new Simon Hurley release. There are some amazing new products. Thanks, guys. Bye.